Hello everyone, my name is John, I'm the Geeky Fanboy, and welcome back to me talking about books today. I'm going to talk about all the books I've read in the months of February and March. I'm putting these 2 months together because I didn't actually read that many books in the past 2 months, so it would have made for a very, very short video at the end of February. So I'm just throwing the two together because overall, February, March were a bit slow for me in terms of reading. I think I finished like 3 or 4 novels and like a handful of comic books on the side. Um, so I definitely read more in January. February, March were a bit slower. Uh, Probably because I don't know, it was just a lot of stuff going on in February and March. But I got a bunch of new reading material at the end of March, and I'm now fully back into it. So I think for April, I have a lot more to talk about. But for now, let's just talk about February, March. It doesn't even matter how much we're reading anyway. It matters that we're reading at all. So here is my wrap up for the months of February and March and what I read in those months. First up, I'm going to talk about the novels I have read, and then the second half, we'll talk about some of the comic books I've read. And we're starting off with the first book that I finished in February, and it is The Stranger Times. So I've had this book lying around for a while, and finally found the motivation to read it. The premise of this book is that it's about a young woman who's lost her job and tries to find new occupation as soon as possible, and she gets accepted for a position as I think new editor in like for a newspaper called The Stranger Times, and this newspaper deals with all kinds of weird and supernatural happenings across Britain. So this newspaper deals with, the Loch Ness monster. Someone thinks, my husband is Elvis, or I don't know, I saw a leprechaun. Those kinds of things, the kinds of things where people usually are like, well, some phonies came up with that, but as you can probably guess, some of that stuff is actually real. And this newspaper writes about it. And then there's someone who's related to the newspaper gets murdered. There's a whole case that's opened up, and they're investigating what has happened to that person, how their newspaper is involved. So this had a really cool premise. Like it sort of has a Terry Pratchett kind of vibe, and especially in terms of the humor. And I like the idea of like a supernatural newspaper, and writing about things. And I've always liked this idea of stuff that seems kooky and weird to the normal people is actually real in like this fantasy part of the world. So I was excited to get into this. This is also the first book of a series. However, I'm not quite sure if I will continue this series. Like, this book wasn't by any means bad, um, but it turned out to be a bit more mid than I had hoped it would be. Because well, the strong part of this book is the cast of characters. Like, all the people we meet who work at the newspaper are like a fun and colorful bunch of characters, all with their own like distinctive characteristics and personalities. Some of them are really funny, some of them are just plain weird, some of them are very rude but still weirdly endearing, especially like the chief editor, like the boss of the newspaper, is like this very rude, politically incorrect kind of twat who is awful, but also at the same time he's weirdly funny and charismatic. And he has a fun secretary who like keeps him in check, and there's like a bunch of really cool, interesting characters, and they're definitely the highlight of this book. Like whenever this novel delves into like the relationships between these characters, when they're just hanging out and having like longer dialogue scene, those moments are really fun. The problem lies more in this book with the story, because it takes a really long time to get going. Like this whole premise with, someone related to the newspaper gets murdered and a case is opened up and they investigate it. It takes a really long time for that murder to happen in the first place. And this book deals with occasional multiple POVs. And the thing is, as the reader, you sort of basically know everything. Like when the murder happens, you know who dies. you know basically who did it and sort of what lies behind it. And then it takes the characters almost more than half the novel to basically get to that same point of knowledge that the reader has had this whole time. And that is really frustrating to read because you're basically just waiting for the characters to catch up with the amount of knowledge that you've had for like almost 200 pages now. And it doesn't really, it's not really exciting if you have to wait for that long for like the story to get going in the first place, and then you only really get like 100 pages of actual investigation. Then the climax itself was also kind of underwhelming as well. Um, so I don't know if I'll continue the series. It wasn't by any means bad. It was just sort of like disappointingly mid. But I would still recommend it if you're like a fan of like urban fantasy and sort of like to read Terry Pratchett as well. Um, just maybe take a look if the premise interests you. I think I gave this like 3 stars, and I'll probably leave it at that for now. The next book I finished was Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers. I'm on my reread still. I'm currently I'm like only like four or 5 chapters away from finishing Return of the King. But yeah, in February I finished listening, because I'm listening to an audiobook for this reread. I finished reading Two Towers, and what can I say? Lord of the Rings is amazing. Lord of the Rings is fantastic. The Two Towers basically just dives more into like the story. It gets a bit more exciting because now the company, the Fellowship of the Ring, is split up. It's really fun to like read the adventures of Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli. Like these 3 have like their own little D&D campaign going on. Basically, it was really fun to like go along with them and through them. Discover, the country of Rohan and see how Theoden has been taken over by an evil wizard and how all of that business develops. And the second half of the book, which is a bit slower but nevertheless interesting, is like following Frodo and Sam going towards Mordor, trying to get rid of the ring. And then, of course, they encounter Gollum. And Gollum is such a fascinating character. Like, you could write pages and pages just about that one specific character alone. Honestly, like, the only minor problem I have with Two Towers is that like, in the first third of the book, like, when Merry and Pippin are on the run and they hang out with Treebeard, those 1 or 2 chapters are really slow. Purposefully so, because Ents talk very slowly. There's a lot of singing and talking. I don't necessarily mind the singing. I think I'm one of the few people who actually enjoys all the songs in The Lord of the Rings. But because of the nature of the Ents and how Treebeard talks, these chapters really drag on. But the good thing is that the narration basically deals with Merry and Pippin within 2 chapters, tells the entire story, and then we move on and we deal with Aragorn and Theoden and Rohan and all that, and that's done. That was like, that's like the only bad thing about Two Towers. But apart from that, I love this series, fantasy masterpiece. This was just a fantastic read or listen, and I gave Two Towers, just like Fellowship of the Ring, 4.75 stars. Next up, I read a book that you have seen me talk about here on the channel. Namely, I read The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. I won't say too much here because I have an entire review video about this book that you can watch right here, where I talk about this book for like over an hour. It was very terribly mid, so to speak. I didn't enjoy it very much. I could see hints and glimpses at an interesting story, set in a fairy world, and it's sort of like all about the politics and this human girl trying to find her position within the fairy world. But it just didn't hit the right notes with me. The plot was very confusing because there basically wasn't one. There basically wasn't a plot for like 75% of the book. It's also way too short for what it's trying to do, to be like the sort of political intrigue fairy Game of Thrones thing. And yeah, if you want to hear more about it, watch the video. I ended up giving this book a 1.75. Next up, I read a book by one of my favorite contemporary authors. Namely, I read The Humans by Matt Haig. So Matt Haig, you might know from his most popular book, is probably The Midnight Library. I know him from Reasons to Stay Alive, a book that personally means a lot to me. And The Humans is one of his earlier books that I haven't read yet. And I came across it in the bookshop. I was like, yeah, sure. I'm always happy to read some Matt Haig. And what can I say? Matt Haig is comfy. He's like a comfort author. His books are comfort to me. Are they cheesy? Yes, but in a sort of endearing kind of way. So The Humans is about an alien from very, very far away, and this alien travels to Earth because a mathematician has found uh, something that the humans are not supposed to find out about yet. And this alien basically kills the mathematician and takes over his body and takes over his life and is now embodying this mathematician. So we follow this alien as he takes on this new life, has to learn how to be human, what it means to be human, has to interact with, this man's troubled family life because his son basically hates him. The marriage is basically non-existent at this point. Everyone sort of hates. Not everyone really likes the mathematician, and this alien basically has to deal with, he has to get rid of the information this mathematician has found. At the same time, he has to sort of deal with, human society. So the main shtick of this book is basically this alien making observations about humanity that are very humorous and witty and very true to a certain degree, but also, of course, very cliched about, that he doesn't, like, the alien doesn't understand why it's offensive to people if you run around naked. Like, clothes are apparently really important. For some reason, kissing is really important, and people really like to read magazines, and he thinks like that's some kind of super duper religious important text or something. It's stuff like that. Very funny, witty observations about human nature, about our society. And I really like those observations. Sure, some of them are very cliched, and you can tell exactly where this book is gonna go from the very beginning. But I didn't mind that because this book just takes you on a comforting but also emotional journey as you sort of follow this alien as he learns to adjust to human life, and in a way you sort of start thinking yourself about, what's my life? What does it mean to be human to me? Like, how do you understand or interpret some of those seemingly very important things that make us human? And there were one or two moments in this book, I'm going to be honest, I cry easily, but there were one or two moments in this book where I cried a bit. Because Matt Haig just manages to address certain themes that are very close to me, they're very dear to me and very important to me. And he just manages to talk about them in a, albeit cheesy, but still very understanding and comforting way. So I think I ended up giving this 4 stars. It was a comforting read, had some great observations, some very funny moments. Sure, it's predictable, you can tell exactly where this is gonna go, and Matt Haig, as always, is very cheesy and a bit over the top and cliched. Like, he's not gonna be for everyone, but if you're on the lookout for like an emotional, comforting read, I can recommend this one. And for our last novel, I am going to talk about the book Ink and Sigil. This is also a book I've had lying around for a long time, for at least a year or two. And I finally got around to reading it. I think I read it right after Stranger Times because it has a sort of similar vibe, as in that this is more of a urban fantasy story that's a bit more humorous. What is a bit more special about Ink and Sigil is that it is very much Scottish leaning in its narration and its voice, and that it features a main character who's actually an old guy. That's something I really liked. It's about this man, I think McVarish is his name, and he basically makes magic sigils, so like, healing sigils, or sigils that make you more powerful, that make you more lusty, those kinds of things. and he's one of the few people on the planet who can do that. And what happens is that one of his assistant gets murdered. This is not the first time this has happened, but something about this case is very strange because he discovers that his assistant was involved in some illegal shit. So then he goes on to sort of investigate what his assistant been up to, and the story sort of goes from there as he uncovers the mysteries and the crimes behind what his assistant was up to. And at the same time, he has to deal with some personal problems because he's been cursed. Not only has been cursed that his assistants die, but he's also been cursed with something I find very funny. Basically, his curse is that if he talks to anyone for a longer time, they end up hating him. Like, just if he like verbally out loud starts talking to people and it goes on for too long, they start despising him. And I think that's really funny. So in the book, there are many moments where he has to like think about how much can I talk to people with my actual voice. And if he doesn't, he like uses an app on his phone, like a voice app, so he can talk to people. And some of them are like, why are you doing that? So that was really funny. And like I said, I like that we have an older main character. It's like, I think the main character in this is like 60 years old or something. I just think we don't see a lot of like old characters in fantasy, especially not as main characters. So that was a positive surprise. As for the rest of the book, it was alright. It wasn't like great. I enjoyed it slightly more than Stranger Times, I think. This has a kind of adult humor you have to sort of either like or not. Like, it's very purposefully a bit cringy and adult and South Park-ish at times. Like, for example, there's a main character in this book, and I'm not kidding you here, he's called Buck Foy. That's one of the main characters' names. And that's the sort of humor you have to deal with in this book. Also, like cursing and stuff, and at times it seems purposefully funny. At some points, you're like, are you just trying to be like edgy and adult? Because that's not how this works. So yeah, that's something you maybe have to see for yourself if you like it. I thought it was alright for most parts of the book, even though there were some moments where I was like, that's just cringe and doesn't work and weird. The story is alright. I honestly thought the investigation, the mystery itself could have been a bit more interesting. I would have liked for the main character to actually do a bit more of like actual detective work himself, because he does get a lot of help throughout the story. And once again, the finale, the climax, is a tiny bit underwhelming. But I do like some of the secondary characters we meet that the main character hangs out with. For example, there's a really cool lesbian goth girl who is kind of like his secretary, but she also has some magical powers and is completely badass and is basically the muscle of the group. She's really cool. So there's some interesting characters throughout the book, and there's some fun interactions. You have to see if this is something you enjoy. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but if you're like on the lookout for something that's again sort of like a bit more on the funny side, has more of an urban fantasy feel, like it's an easy enough read. I gave it a 3. I think I gave it 3.25 stars. I thought it was alright. And now for the manga and comic books I've read. I have continued reading the original Dragon Ball manga. I basically read 3 of these massive things. So what this means is I have now completed the original Dragon Ball story and have moved on to Dragon Ball Z. It seemed quite fitting to keep reading this, considering, Toriyama died not too long ago. And it was really great to like finally be able to like finish reading his original story, because as a kid I grew up with the Dragon Ball Z anime, but I'd never read the original manga, nor had I seen actually the first anime of just Dragon Ball. So I'm really glad I finally got into this. Like I said, I finished the original Dragon Ball story now with, Piccolo Jr. arc and all that at the end. And it was a lot of fun. Like, obviously, there are so many things I could talk about now, but that would go on for very long. But I'm so glad I finally read the original Dragon Ball story. It is very much a more humoristic, like comedic story. It relies a lot more on gags and childish humor, especially in the first couple of arcs, which also contains many scenes and comedy moments that didn't age well or are just very weird in this manga anime kind of way, where you have to see manga just be like that, I guess. But I think as the story goes on, like the original Dragon Ball story gets better and better with like essentially every story arc. Like my favorite arcs were really the ones that came towards like the latter half of the original story. Like my favorite ones were really like the Piccolo, King Piccolo, Piccolo Junior arcs. I also really like the Tenshin Han storyline. Basically, when it's all about the tournaments and the fighting choreography and the villains, then I think this series shines really really well. And this basically continues into Dragon Ball Z. So I'm now in the middle of the Namek saga. And I mean, this is the part of the story I'm familiar with, like from the anime, but it's really fun to finally see the story basically in its original form, because Toriyama has excellent paneling. Like, I love not only like his art, of course, is incredible, but I love his attention to detail, especially when it comes to like the fighting choreography. The paneling for that is so good because you can always exactly tell how the fights work, what's going on, who is doing what. I just admire how well it actually works, considering you're basically just looking at pictures. But it flows really, really nicely, and I like that now with Dragon Ball Z we jump into more like serious topics, and we like really bring out the big guns essentially, also literally in some parts, and getting really into like some of the big villains of this franchise. And I'm really looking forward to continuing reading Dragon Ball Z. But yeah, finish the original Dragon Ball story arc. Gonna continue with Dragon Ball Z now. Overall, Dragon Ball gets like basically 5 stars from me. Just fantastic. I can totally see how this is like one of the big manga series that has impacted like a whole generation, basically my generation and young and older. And it's just a lot of fun to read, and I'm looking forward to continuing. And last but by no means least, I read volume 2 and 3 of the new Hellblazer series, Hellblazer Dead in America. Um, if you've seen some of my other videos, also like my Legends of Tomorrow reviews or something, you know that I'm a big John Constantine fan. He's one of my favorite comic book characters. He's also one of my favorite fictional characters of all time, period. So I was really, really excited when it was announced that a new series was going to come out, and it's a series created by Simon Spurrier and co. And they've had a series a couple of years ago, like 2 or 3 years ago, a short run of Hellblazer that I enjoyed massively. Was a big fan of it. Unfortunately, at the time they couldn't continue it because COVID and all that. But now they're back with like this new story, which is basically like a continuation of their previous arc, and it's so much fun to get back into like proper Hellblazer. Like, it's appropriately dark, gritty, has a lot of political commentary, like especially volume 3, like issue 3 that came out in March, had a lot to say about American politics and the American mentality in terms of like Democrats and Republican, how do those mentalities work for the American people versus people who try to come to America, like immigrants. That was really, really interesting to get into. We also get to see some familiar faces, like Swamp Thing is back in this. His design is really, really cool because in this it's more like a hot desert setting. So Swamp Thing is made up of like cacti, desert plants. So it looks a bit weird, looks a bit different, but really, really cool. We also get to hang out with like some secondary characters that only like seasoned Hellblazer readers will remember, I think, but nevertheless, they're brought back in a very interesting way where even people who are not familiar with those characters are still able to like sort of get in their story. And it's honestly just really, really fun to get into, to see how Constantine will deal with, with what he has to retrieve. Like, he has to work for the Sandman, who also features in this, and it's just a good time. Like, honestly, if like me, you are a fan of the Hellblazer series and of the John Constantine character, and you've been waiting for another series that really captures the spirit of the original series from back then, this is definitely the run. I'm having a lot of fun with it. Um, I think we're not we're about halfway or almost halfway through the run now, and honestly, every time I finish another issue, I'm just really excited and giddy to find out how it's going to continue. The art is absolutely gorgeous. Some really great paneling. The coloring is truly amazing, and especially like in volume 3 and issue 3, there are some really truly beautiful panels because they're colored in like, it has only like one use of color, like especially issue 3 plays a lot with like the color red and black, so there's some truly beautiful panels that play around with that. um yeah, I can only recommend. I think I gave issue 2 a 3.75, and I gave issue 3 a 4.25. Like, issue 3 was the best one for me so far. I'm honestly looking forward to it, and I can only recommend it to you if you're on the lookout for some good comic book reads. Okay, that's it already for the books I've read in February, March. Like I said, not that many, but the important thing is not how many books we read, but that we read at all. So that's it for my February, March reading wrap up. I hope you enjoy. Please do tell me down in the comments below what kinds of books you've been reading in the past 2 weeks. Did you already have some reading highlights or some flops that you didn't like? And please do tell me down in the comments below. I always love to hear from you what you guys are reading. And of course, if you've read any of the books that I've talked about here, tell me about it. I would love to hear some of your thoughts and opinions on them. As always, if you're curious as to what I'm reading, or if you just want to hear my reviews as I finish books, feel free to follow me in Goodreads and or Storygraph. I rate all my books there, and I try to write reviews for most of the books I'm reading, so make sure you follow me on there if you're curious to see what I'm reading. What I'm currently reading, I'm currently reading 3 books. Like I said, I'm currently listening to the audiobook for Return of the King. I'm not too far from finishing that, actually, so you can probably expect to hear about that at the end of April. I'm reading the next book for reading popular TikTok books to see if they're any good. I'm reading The Serpent and the Wings of Night. You guys chose that one, the book I was looking forward to reading the least. But yeah, I'm making progress with that, and I just started reading. I actually do not remember what this book is called. I started a new one just today. Sons of Darkness. I just started Sons of Darkness today, which is sort of like a epic high fantasy Indian mythology inspired book that I've had lying around for a while. I'm trying to get into that as well. So those are the books I'm currently reading. Feel free to tell me what you're currently reading. Maybe we can get some recommendations out there. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't done it already. And I'll see all of you very soon. Goodbye.